accountancy. Here are 5 things that you could do to improve your tax position before end of financial year 2026, which is only 8 days away. Here's a quick list to summarize. Make donations to charities, top up super, sell loss-making assets, don't buy stuff for tax reasons, and start your car logbook. Let's start with donations. What are the basic rules? Well, a donation is only deductible if it's made to a charity with deductible gift recipient or DGR status. There's a government website called ABN Lookup where you can check if a charity is deductible or not. There might be some fantastic causes that aren't deductible, and it's still great to give to those, but you just can't put them on your tax return. The deduction needs to be a straight gift. A common example where people get this wrong is they buy a membership in a community radio station. Those aren't deductible, but donations to that radio station would be. And of course, you've got to keep the receipt. Some donations where you get an item of merchandise are still deductible. For example, Anzac and Remembrance Day badges and a Big Freeze beanie being 3 of the most common. So given you get tax back on a donation, what is the true cost of a donation? Well, to give $100 to a charity could cost you as little as $53 if you're on the highest tax bracket. The true cost after you get the tax back is shown on the table there on the screen and varies between tax brackets. And finally, as a little side note, most of the charities that you hear about that have the big marketing budgets and that dominate the receipts I see from my clients are Australian-based charities doing work in Australia, mostly in the pharmaceutical medical space as it happens. But there are a number of charities doing some fantastic work overseas. And while things are tougher than they were in Australia, for many of us, things are still pretty good. And sometimes you can cast your mind a bit wider than just the local scene. And the charities that have the money to put ads up on TV. There's a few charities I've listed on the screen which I think are fantastic, but wouldn't have got much of your attention until now. Second one is topping up super. Now, this is a common thing people do in June, but you've got to think about why you're doing it and is it worth you doing it? Because you are making an investment. So superannuation lets you invest in a tax effective way. So if you invest through super, you get to invest more money than if you invested that same money outside super because of the tax breaks. But your investment in super can only be for certain purposes. And the savings, the tax savings are low if you don't pay much tax to begin with. So let's start with tax brackets. If you're in the bottom 2 brackets, adding money to super to claim a tax deduction is not very helpful because the difference between your tax rate and your super tax rate is the reason why super makes sense. And the bottom 2 brackets, that gap just isn't there. There are low income super contribution amounts that you can make, but I'll cover that in a separate video because it gets a bit more complicated. I want this to be quite short. So, but pre-tax deductible contributions don't work in the lower 2 brackets. The other thing is I said super is investing and it's for a purpose. So if you have income under $45,000, then small amounts of super are fine. If you're investing for retirement, super is great. If you're investing for your first home and that home's going to be in Australia, super is great. But keep it under $15,000 because that's the limit for a first home contribution. So super only works if what you're investing for matches what super can be used for. If you don't want to invest, don't just add money to super to get some sort of tax break. Or if you're investing, but you're not investing for retirement and you're not investing for a first home, then don't consider super because it can only be used for those 2 things. If you are spending as much as you're earning and you have nothing left over to invest and you're putting money in super out of your sort of buffer savings, then maybe reconsider that as well because you're probably going to need that buffer for something else. I'll do a separate video on exactly how to top up super, what the limits are, what the complications are, but that's all I'll cover for the purpose of this video. Another common thing to do is to sell loss-making assets, but there are two traps people make when they do this in June each year. So let's cover the basics. If you sell a CGT asset, that could be property, shares, crypto, bullion, and you sell for less than you bought it for, you make a capital loss. This can be helpful, but not always. So just remember that these losses are not deductible against your salary. So let's talk about James. He makes $120,000 a year. He sells his holdings in some meme coin and he loses $10,000. So he's made $110,000 for a year if you count the salary and the loss. But in the tax system, capital losses are quarantined. You can't use that capital loss to reduce the $120,000. James's salary or his income remains $120,000 and the loss is carried forward to future years. So the loss can be used at some point, but not now. So triggering a loss by selling out of that investment before 30 June is not urgent. What about if James, the same example, same salary, but he made a 10,000 capital gain on a tech stock in America? So his income goes up to 130,000. Then if he sold his loss-making crypto investment, that $10,000 capital gain could be cancelled out by the $10,000 loss. So in that example, where he does have a capital gain, the loss does reduce his income for the 2026 tax year. So one mistake people make is thinking that the losses can be used straight away. The other is that they sell an investment that they probably should be keeping. So Emily owns 10,000 shares in Small Miner Limited. She paid $1 per share and they're trading at 5 cents. She's got an unrealized loss, so a loss on something she hasn't yet sold, of $9,500. The share price drop was due to temporary issues in the company that are now resolved. So this share is going to bounce back. But Emily sells it because she said, no, I need to get the tax loss. I need to save the tax. The share price recovers over the next year to 50 cents. So it's not back where she started, but it's a lot better than the 5 cents when she sold purely for tax reasons. So don't sell shares that might have dropped, but you think will recover. Same for crypto, same for gold, same for silver. So you might think, okay, what I'll do is, for Emily's situation, she wants to keep investing in this company and she wants to tax the tax loss. Let's get the best of both worlds. So she sells the shares on the 22nd of June and she buys the same shares back on the 24th of June. So she's triggered that capital loss, she thinks, but unfortunately, the ATO calls this a wash sale. A wash sale is where you sell a particular asset and you buy it back or you somehow end up in the same economic position as you were. The ATO is allowed to tell you to disregard that loss. You can't include it on your tax return. And it's as if she never sold that share for tax purposes. So what could she have done differently? Well, there's nothing to say you can't sell an asset and buy a similar one. So you could sell Bitcoin and buy Ethereum. You could sell Commonwealth Bank shares, buy National Australia Bank shares. You could sell the iShares ETF in Australia, America, whatever. I mean, it's hard to have lost money on those recently, but anyway, sell the ETF from one provider and buy the exact same from another. So iShares and Vanguard, Beta shares, they all have, and Van Eck is another one, they all have ETFs that are covering very similar sectors that perform in a very similar way in terms of their ups and downs. So if you sell one and buy another, that's not a wash sale because you've bought a different asset. They're not identical. They're close but not identical. And another way to trigger a loss would be you might sell those shares in your name and your spouse might buy them. It's two different people doing with different assets. You might sell them in your own name, buy them in your family trust, or you might transfer those shares to your trust or to your self-managed super fund, and you'll still trigger a loss that way. The ATO might not like last couple of options in particular, but it's not the same as selling and buying. I think it's fine. So if you have loss-making assets, when would you sell? When would you not sell? Well, you wouldn't sell an asset you think might recover. Don't cut your losses. If you think the share's gone down, staying down, or getting worse, of course, sell for economic reasons. Don't sell for tax reasons if you think it's going to bounce back. If you plan to sell and immediately rebuy, that's a wash sale, so don't bother selling in that situation. If the investment, you think, this is a dud investment, it's gone down to 5 cents, it's not going to come back, you don't need to rush to sell it if you have no capital gains to use it against this financial year. So when would you sell? If you know that the share is, let's say it's a dead duck, you're not going to get your money back, you don't think it's going to recover in price, and you have capital gains on something else this financial year, then yes, that's the year to sell. But the other circumstances, not really worth it. The next item is don't buy stuff for tax reasons. You only get back a percentage of what you purchased. This is the same table as in the donation screen. Yes, you get tax back on what you purchased, but if you don't need it, you've wasted the money. So you might spend $100, get $53 back. You're still out of pocket. Sorry, you get $47 back. You're still out of pocket $53. And if you're at a lower tax bracket, it can be up to $84 or even $100. This don't buy stuff for tax reasons is particularly true for assets above $300, as these are subject to depreciation, which means you have to spread out the cost over time anyway. I've given a few examples of what are the common depreciating assets that we see clients claiming. Depreciation is based on how many days you own an asset in the financial year. So if you buy it on the second last day of the financial year, you only get 2 days worth of depreciation. So that's 0.5%, and that's 0.5% of year one's depreciation. So it's even smaller again. So it's almost nothing. So the difference tax-wise between buying in June or July for an asset over $300 is so tiny that you shouldn't rush to buy it. The only reason to buy in late June financially is if there are tax time sales and you think you're getting a great deal. We did a little video about that last year if you're interested. And finally, you could start a logbook before the financial year ends. So what's a logbook for? It's for recording car expenses. There are 2 ways to claim for your car. There's a set rate method. You make a reasonable estimate of your work-related kilometres, times by 88 cents, which is this year's rate. No receipts needed, no logbook needed. It's a very simple method. The second method is to prepare a logbook. The logbook lets you claim a percentage of all the expenses on your car, a percentage of rego, insurance, fuel, mechanic bills, and the actual car itself. You can claim some of the decline in value or depreciation each year. But you've got to have a 12-week logbook to prove it. So generally speaking, if you've got a low work use percentage, just use the set rate method, the simple method. You'd be a lot better off. If you've got a high work use percentage, use the logbook method. Now, a lot of people don't bother with the logbook method, even with high work use percentages, because it's a pain. It's a nuisance to do. But here's why you might want to do it for this financial year potentially. The set rate method gets decided at the start of a financial year, regardless of what happens to the cost of running a car during that year. The 88 cents they decided upon was the same as the previous tax year, the 2023-24 tax year. Sorry, 2024-25 tax year hasn't changed in 2 years, but the cost of running a car has changed quite a bit because petrol prices were significantly higher for a while during the period of the war in Iran. Only the logbook method will reflect the higher cost of petrol. And if you start a logbook now, run it for 12 weeks, it started before the financial year, it doesn't matter that it ended after the financial year. So who should consider a logbook this year? You've got a high work use on your vehicle, usually 50% plus is a benchmark or rule of thumb. You've not kept a logbook previously, you've always just used a set rate method, but you want to use one this year to reflect the higher cost of running the vehicle. That's who should be using a logbook. It's particularly helpful if you have a car that's less than 3 years old. because the way depreciation works is most of it happens at the start of the ownership period and less towards the end of the ownership period. Those are some pre-30 June ideas to think about. Some will apply to you, some won't, but hopefully one of those was helpful to you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.